All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nature Journal show. Today we have Rosemary Mosco, writer, cartoonist, and naturalist that will be talking about the joy of the familiar with backyard birds at Wild Wonder 2024.
Hi, I'm
Welcome to
so
the
excited to
show.
be here. Thank you. Thank you.
Yay! It's really awesome to have you. I've really enjoyed your classes in the past. So let's talk about let's dive right into pigeons a little bit. Maybe you can tell us a recent story, a recent funny story about something you've seen observing pigeons or other backyard birds.
Let me think. So I so I rescue a lot of pigeons that are injured, and I had a pretty funny rescue recently where I was on the phone with a relative, and we were having quite an emotional conversation. And I'm walking around this neighborhood on the phone with her, and I look down and I see a pigeon. And a few minutes before, I had seen some birds of prey go rocketing by, so I wondered if this was maybe a victim of a juvenile bird of prey that had not quite, sealed the deal. So this pigeon couldn't fly, but it was still, looking really healthy otherwise. So I'm sort of talking to my relative and comforting my relative, and also thinking, oh no, what do I do? Like gaming out this pigeon rescue. So the moment I got off the phone with her, I thought, well, I need a box. I'm rearranging my whole afternoon because it's like an hour drive to the wildlife center. I need a box. I need a thing to pick it up with. And I'm staring at this pigeon, and the door to the apartment that this pigeon is kind of like huddling under opens, and these two spectacularly dressed people come out, just gorgeous, head to toe, beautiful. So they said, they kind of looked at me. They didn't say anything. They looked at me like, why are you staring at our door? And I just pointed at the pigeon and I said, there's a pigeon here. Do you have a box? So it turns out they were going to a wedding, and, they were clearly like in the bridal groom party, and they were, dressed to the nines. But they took the time to go in and get like an old shoebox, and the pigeon did not want to be caught, but it couldn't fly, so it was like running around. So I'm chasing around this pigeon while they're getting their suits into the car. Anyway, I really kudos to those people for being amenable to helping a pigeon and not asking me what I was doing. But then the rest of my afternoon was less exciting, which was driving this pigeon for the entire afternoon to the rehab center. But yeah, thank you. Thank you, random beautifully dressed people. I hope the wedding was beautiful.
Nice. That's a great story. Um, why do you think this topic is important, like the idea of appreciating pigeons and backyard birds?
I think I mean, so by now we've all read Amy Tan's amazing, Backyard Bird Chronicles book, and she like encapsulates it. But I think there's so much to be learned from the ordinary birds around us. And there's also it's not just about like how fun and beautiful they are and how interesting they are to look at, and that a lot of birders kind of, and I'm a birder and I include myself in here, but we often sort of start writing off the more familiar birds. We get a
Hmm.
little bored with them. But also a lot of these birds have a lot to say about human history. A lot of them are here either because of people, or their populations have fluctuated because of people. There's a lot going on with them, and you can learn a lot about us. Like, not to make it all about us, but you can kind of hold up a mirror when you look at familiar birds. So I think they have a lot to tell us.
Cool. I was just looking through your Instagram, and there was a image on there where it's a mirror. It's like a handheld mirror, and there's a bird reflected in it. So I'll put up your Instagram here for people who don't know about it already. It's a great place to see a lot of Rosemary's work, and I always laugh when one of your comics pops up in my feed. So it's a really
Oh,
nice compliment to the other stuff that I see on Instagram. Maybe you could describe, you already mentioned sort of the birders that are, they want to move on to other more exotic things and stuff like that. Maybe you could describe how you think your talk will be different. And I know you're going to have one talk that's just you, and then you're going to be in conversation with Amy Tan and John Muir Laws. But with the questions here, I'm probably just going to lump both of those talks together, if that's okay with you. How do you think your talk will be different for someone who's an alpha birder versus someone who's like hasn't even gotten started with birding yet? Will they have different experiences, those two audience members?
I honestly think they won't. And I think it's because if someone is just starting about learning about birds, there's a lot that they don't know. So I'm going to have a lot of fun, exciting information to share. And then for someone who knows a lot about birds, I mean, honestly, when I started researching my pigeon book, and I wrote an article about sparrows too for Audubon, when I started researching those, there was a lot that I didn't know, and there's a lot that isn't included in a lot of general bird books. So I think both groups are going to be kind of shocked by some of what I talk about, to be honest, because I've been shocked by it. I think that it's going to complement a lot of the classes because we're going to be learning techniques for observing and capturing what we see. And so I'm just going to kind of give a pitch for, here are a few of the specific birds you can focus on, and here are some things to look at, and here is some fun experiences you can have with them, and also ways that you can understand them more when you're seeing them. So I'm hoping that it will all sort of complement each other.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
And then when people leave your talk, how will they be different?
Well, they will each have a free pigeon. No, I'm kidding. Look under your chair.
Everyone gets a free pigeon.
I wish. There are so many adoptable pigeons out there that it would, honestly, we could make a big dent in the population if we adopted them all out. I think people have told me that they now like familiar birds that they thought were boring before, or even distasteful. I mean, I'm going to be talking about, among others, but Canada geese, house sparrows, gulls, not necessarily birds that you have to be happy with all the time. Like, there are reasons to be frustrated, but I'm hoping that people will gain a new appreciation for them. And then also that when you're outside, you're going to start seeing some of the things I mentioned and find that kind of interesting. And maybe you'll even start looking into backyard birds that I don't know anything about, and then you'll start talking about them and journaling about them, and then I'll learn more too.
Yeah, it's cool. There's different backyard birds, and I mean, some people have, in some parts of the world, their backyard birds would seem exotic to us. So, well, it does seem like we have, I'm going to put this comment up here for you to see. It does seem like we have a fan and also a pigeon lover in the audience here.
Oh,
And
thank
and
you, Louise.
and Louise also has a funny comment about your pigeon story. That was a great day for the pigeon. Louise has some rescued pigeons as well. So thanks for joining the audience, Louise. Okay, well, we already well, let's hear a little bit about, maybe you could describe before we go more into pigeons, how would you describe your teaching style and background?
Yeah, so I probably, this is going to be a talk as opposed to a class, but
Yeah,
I've taught at Wild Wonder before, and mostly I just love seeing what other people do. It's so wonderful. I'm mostly trying to give people a few tools and prompts to come up with something amazing, and then usually by the end, I'm just floored by how creative and funny people are. But I think I'm mostly trying to come at it from sort of an equal position where we're all discovering weird new things. And so I'm sort of going to be saying, come along with me, and here are some weird things that I've discovered. So I think it's kind of a mutual experience too. And there's going to be a little bit of audience participation, which I think is going to be really funny. So we'll see how that goes.
cool. Yeah, it's interesting because I think it was, when did you teach the class on comics at Wild Wonder? Was that last year or the year before?
That was, let's see, so that was last year. And then 2 years ago, I gave one of the keynotes about making comics and adding that to nature journals.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I think that when I invested research, I try to research all the instructors before the conference and then talk about it on the Nature Journal show and everything. And I couldn't find that much about your teaching background. So I think when I went over the schedule, I was like, last year, and I do a thing where I go over the schedule and talk about like what I know about the different classes and try to help people sift through all the classes and everything. And I said like that I knew that you had this like illustration and comics background and that you had given the talk before, but I didn't really know much about your teaching. But your class was so, I must say, it was so good last year,
Oh,
and the
thank
way
you.
you incorporated the people being able to share their comics and those different exercises where we had you gave us a story, and then with I still remember it was something about a bald eagle flying over a lake, grabbing a fish, flying away with the fish, and then the fish like escaping or something. And then we had different amounts of time, and it was
Mhm.
such a good exercise. And then the way you used Padlet and everybody was submitting their stuff, it was one of my favorite classes. So
Oh,
so
that
that was
all
really
part of the
cool.
wild wonder. I'd never used Padlet before, and
Uh-huh.
this conference is so good at running um,
Yeah.
immersive and participatory events. It was a blast. So I guess I didn't fully answer your question. I mean, I don't have a teaching background. I've done some environmental ed. And then basically, when I started making comics, people started asking me to do workshops at bird
Mm,
festivals. And so I developed a few. And then also, just as an author illustrator, I've done some school visits. So I kind of built up some workshops and adapted them. And I've given a bunch of them at bird festivals,
mhm,
and it's just so fun. So it's sort of like a
mm,
side thing that I do. But the most fun thing I've done now is, I think, two or three, I think three at this point, drink and draws. So I run my
mhm,
comics workshop, but for adults at a bar or with wine or
mhm.
something like that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it's not that different from the workshop that I run for kids. Like, the content
Uh-huh.
is a little
Yeah.
different, but it's not that different, because all we want is that opportunity to do that fun stuff that we did as kids. So yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, cool. Okay, let's go more into pigeons.
Mhm.
Why aren't pigeons on any flags or medieval heraldry or sports teams mascots?
Oh, that's interesting. Um,
At least that I've seen.
yeah. So I can tell you why they're not beloved now. But I mean, definitely in the past and up until pretty recently, they were held in really high esteem.
Mm,
They might not have been on any heraldry, because maybe they are somewhere, or maybe they aren't very fearsome. Like, you can't have a
hmm.
pigeon, like a lion or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they are, up until, kind of the middle to late, in 1900s, they were really a pretty adored and appreciated bird for thousands and thousands of years. And even if you don't come across heraldry, you come across a lot of excerpts from famous people and royalty just talking about how great pigeons are.
Darwin liked them, right?
Yeah, Darwin adored them, and I was actually really surprised about it, because I hadn't read like as much Darwin as I had by the time I finished my pigeon project. And
Hmm.
he was obsessed with them. Like, they're
Yeah.
kind of the unsung heroes of a lot of his work. He writes a lot about pigeons.
Hmm.
So he wanted a creature that he could breed in his backyard easily and observe the ways that genes spread.
Hmm.
And he was trying to kind of answer this question. So pigeons were domesticated. I mean, he didn't know this at the time, but 5 to 10,000 years ago. So, like, before the dawn of recorded writing, like, we were talking like ancient bird. And pretty quickly, people started to split them into breeds that are honestly so wild.
Hmm.
Picture like a Great Dane versus, like, a Chihuahua, or like one of the curly dogs or something like that. If you didn't know that those were the same species or
Hmm.
came from the same species,
Yeah.
you'd think. So Darwin was trying to answer, are all the pigeon breeds that look so different, which now none of us are familiar with, but at the time people were, are they all from the same species? And he
Hmm.
determined that they were. And what was going on with them was we were shaping them with breeding, which
Hmm.
is a little bit like evolution. So in doing that, he became obsessed with his pigeons, and he started to write to friends and say, you need to come see my pigeons. It's the best thing you could possibly expect. He was so into pigeons. He loved them so much.
Nice. Yeah, I think Origin of Species starts with a lot about artificial selection and pigeons and stuff before he gets into natural selection even.
Mhm.
Okay, so have you learned any? I know you're really good at funny. ecological factoids or funny biological factoids. What are some funny or interesting, weird ecological factoids that you've nerded out about in researching your book?
Let's see. I mean, how many hours do you have? There's so much.
I mean, maybe like a couple choice ones.
Yeah, well, so biologically, my all-time favorite fact about pigeons is that they produce milk. So
Oh,
male and female pigeons both produce milk. They produce it in a region of their gastrointestinal system called their crop. So it kind of like it is exuded into their crop, and they kind of puke it into their babies' mouths. And what's cool about it is that it evolved convergently with mammalian milk. So that means that that their milk production and our milk production didn't sort of split off evolutionarily, but we both kind of stumbled across the same solution
mhm.
to the same problem, which is how do you give your babies a really high quality start to their life? So for the first few days, baby pigeons are just fed milk. And like I said, like both males and females will give them this milk. And so if you find a baby pigeon that has been orphaned, you have to get it to a wildlife rehabilitator who can brew up milk, like the correct milk. Like you can't give them cow's milk. It has to be like this special stuff. So they
Uh-huh.
need milk. And it has a lot of similarities to mammalian milk. So it's stimulated by the hormone prolactin, which is it stimulates milk production in mammals. It's got fats and proteins and all kinds of other, immune supporting stuff that really gives them a super good start and enables them to develop really, really fast. So I think milk is my top pigeon.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Okay, why do people call them like flying rats and trash birds and how what do you think about all of that?
Yeah. So there's a few things that led to the pigeon's decline in esteem. So for thousands of years, they were initially developed as an agricultural creature. So they were developed for people to eat them and for us to use their poop as fertilizer. And then eventually they were developed to fly fancy and carry messages and various things. So they were really, really, really useful. Like they were like incredibly useful creature, and then also really high up, really fancy people would breed special ones and show them off. So the Mughal Emperor Akbar is, I think, my favorite example because he was obsessed with pigeons, Akbar the Great, and he would fly his pigeons, his fancy pigeons, when dignitaries would come to kind of show them how powerful he was. So they were really loved for a really long time. And then what happened in the US around the 1960s and kind of around the world was so first off, everywhere that you take a domestic animal, there will probably be some that go feral. So think of stray cats, stray
Mhm,
dogs, feral horses, feral goats, feral hogs, all that
mhm,
stuff. Like a lot of animals sort of get that we use a lot will get established in the wild, not all of them. So that probably happened the moment we had pigeons flying around, as there would be some strays, which are you're usually like, oh, that's not, a purebred one. And
mhm,
then a lot of the things that we use them for were supplanted technologically. So
mm,
we stopped using them to spread messages. We started using the radio or the telegraph or all that stuff. We stopped eating them. We started eating chickens more for a variety of reasons, but you can just get more meat out of chickens. Chickens don't have to give their babies milk. They can have more babies at once, and you can raise the babies separately. There's all sorts of reasons. So there were stray ones. They became useless, or from our perspective. And then so there were these creatures kind of in our spaces, and especially in our urban spaces, that we were like, why are these here? And so we started to blame disease outbreaks for them, because we were looking at these birds, and they didn't necessarily have the ability to clean themselves as much as they want, and we would look and go, ew, these dirty birds. So people started blaming them for a meningitis outbreak and various other health problems. And so we started to get scared of them.
mhm,
So it's this kind of process that happens where they're abundant and we don't really see them as useful, and they're in our face. And that was kind of what happened to
hmm.
pigeons. Yeah.
What do you think is the future of pigeons? Is there going to be a comeback or something? Is it going to be like Mad Max, post-apocalyptic pigeon rookeries and stuff at some point?
I like that. I mean, sometimes I think about that pigeon milk and I imagine a Mad Max where we're all like milking pigeons because we
Uh-huh.
no longer have cows. I don't think so. What I'm seeing happen now is so this sort of moment of people hating pigeons was almost like a blip, like because it's so small in the many
Mm,
thousands of year long history of pigeons. And our relationship with pigeons has changed so much in that time. What I'm seeing happen now is a lot of people are starting to appreciate them more. A lot of people are getting pet pigeons. So there have been a few viral TikTok people who have like, there's a
mm,
lady in New York has like a little pigeon in her bag that she carries around. There's more and more of that. So I think things are starting to turn around in in terms of pigeons, but it'll be interesting to see because we're not using them for the purposes that we used them before. So it'll be interesting to see like are they just going to morph into kind of a cute dog or cat kind of thing where we
hmm.
have these cute pets. So yeah.
Okay, interesting, cool. Well, let's talk about comics and humor. And I've sort of, it's a little bit artificial, but I think for the
Mhm.
sake of the flow of the conversation, we'll kind of separate them, but it might get messy anyways. Could you talk about how you got started with comics?
Yeah, that's hard to say because I've always made comics. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and newspaper comics were a huge thing at the time. So all I did was wait for the comics and read those. And then yeah, I drew my own. So I've always made comics and always been kind of obsessed with them. And then I was also really obsessed with science and nature. So what I was interested in was what came into comics. Yeah,
Mm,
so it's something I've
cool.
always done. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to recognize that we have a pigeon watching in the audience. So,
What?
yeah. So
Right.
good thing you're saying nice
Oh,
stuff about them.
oh, I love them so much. I follow my Instagram feed. I was showing a friend the other day and she was like, "What is going on with this?" I pretty much just follow rescue pigeons, so it's like I follow Doc and Merlot and Cashew and I there's all these like famous pigeons that I follow that like I'm obsessed with.
That's
There's
funny.
one and their account is called a living breathing football and that's like what their pigeon is shaped like. Yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
cool. Yeah.
Wow, that's hilarious. Thanks for sharing, Louise. Okay, so how has your style changed over the years with your comics?
It has changed a lot because I've been doing them for so dang long. So I think, I mean, I've been drawing since I was a kid, but I started making my first internet comics. My first one went online in 2004, and it was called
Mm,
Bird and Moon, which is why my website is called Bird and Moon. Back then, it was all black and white, and I would draw everything with a certain markers and papers, and I used a light table. So anytime there was an error, I would have to either white out or redraw the whole thing by putting it on a light table and tracing over it. So every
mhm,
comic was constructed by, with a whole million different pieces. Any blacks I had to color in, by hand. And then once all that was done, I just didn't have time to add color myself. And I also wasn't all that knowledgeable in color. So over time, there's been more color. I started drawing digitally, which has the drawbacks of I don't have any nice papers lying around, but the plus
mhm.
that I don't have to get white out everywhere and constantly inhale white out. So
Oh,
that's nice. So yeah, it's definitely changed. I've gotten better I at drawing. So I've taken, I think maybe two, definitely one, I think two John Muir Law's drawing classes,
mm,
which were invaluable, and a bunch of other bird drawing classes with different people, Barry Van Dusen, all sorts of different people. So with the help of other people, I've gotten better at drawing too.
cool. All right. How do you think people can use people who are observing birds in their backyard or people who are nature journaling, how can they use elements of comics in their observations or sort of their experience of just backyard observation and nature journaling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know John Muir Laws has um, talked about that, and he's shown some really cool layouts that you can do in your nature journal with comics. I mean, I think it's pretty easy. Comics are nice because you can show action happening through time.
Hmm.
So you can even see, I mean, that's not always what you show, but you can see that in Amy Tan's book too. She has, like, I was so shocked, you know, when I was reading this book, I thought, oh my goodness, she's doing what I'm doing. Like, she's got comics in here. Like, this is so amazing. So it just like livens things up. You can get funny, and you can also show the movement of things through time, which is what, you know, multi-paneled. When you
Hmm.
put a lot of sort of little squares together, it's like a multi-paneled, like a cartoon, or sorry, a comic. There's a
Hmm.
distinction. So a cartoon is one panel, and a comic is multiple panels, but nobody really bothers with that distinction anymore. I use them both
Hmm.
interchangeably. But in this case, like, you can do multiple little panels and show change.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's just
really,
another technique.
I really nerded out when you mentioned Scott McCloud's sort of taxonomy of different transitions between panels in your class. I was just like, yeah, and I was with some other like nature nerdy, comics nerdy friends, so it was perfect. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I definitely think it's one of those techniques though that it helps if people learn it or see like, oh, this is something I can do, because I think a lot of times what can happen is if uh, people are just nature journaling and on their own, or aren't being exposed to different ideas, they kind of fall into this sort of default mode of like the you know, plant illustration species
Mhm.
profile, where it's like, look at this dandelion, and then you write like the name and some stuff you notice about it. But like then meanwhile they're drawing this dandelion, and like a Cooper's hawk chases a pigeon past them, and they're like, wow, that was cool, but then they don't put that in the nature journal because maybe they
Mhm.
don't know how, or maybe they have reasons of like, oh, I can't draw moving things, or that's too complicated or
Mhm.
too hard. And then like 2 years go by and you won't remember. You'll have the dandelion drawing in your nature journal, but you might not remember that really cool story. And what I've noticed is if I even just try to capture those action moments in nature on my page, even if the drawings aren't great or whatever, later when I look back, I'm so glad that I had that, because those experiences are so priceless. And we can come up with all these reasons why, oh, that's not my style, or oh, I don't do
Mhm.
those kind of themes, or I don't draw birds. But sometimes it's we're sort of rationalizing not doing something because it's outside of our comfort zone. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think it is tricky when you're in nature. I don't know about you, but I have trouble focusing on one thing because there's so much happening.
of
So
course.
sometimes it's helpful to look at one thing, you know, and not notice
Yeah.
the other stuff or not put it in. But yeah, I think if you think comics aren't for you, that's completely fair. But also, there's a lot to comics that isn't just, you know, what we think of as newspaper cartoons, or even just like a funny, you know, little joke. There's there's some beautiful, serious, powerful work.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I mentioned in my class that, you know, I'm really glad you brought up the transition. So that was Scott McCloud who wrote this book, Understanding Comics, which if you know, want to know how to make comics, that's the book. Although he's apparently coming up with a new one.
Mm.
Because that one was, it's very old at this point, and it really was. He
Hmm.
was the only guy. He was like, I'm going to make a theory of comics, and he just
Yeah.
made it up off the top of his head. So he's had some time to think and come up with new stuff. But one thing he talks about is in that magical space from one panel to another, you can have sort of a little bit of action happens. You can have, like, you know, a hawk is flying at a pigeon, and then in the next panel, like, the hawk caught the pigeon. But there's all this other wild stuff that you can do with panel transitions. And one of my favorite things to do is what he calls an aspect to aspect transition. So that's when you show a scene, but you're showing different things that you notice in the scene. So you can make a whole bunch of different little squares and then show, for example, like if you're sitting in the woods, show a close up of a log, show a pullback of the tree, show yourself drawing, show
Hmm.
the sky, show, you know, a few things. And that can be a way of making a comic without having time pass in the comic, and just sort of
Right.
taking a moment. And it can be
Was
really
that
fun.
the? I remember you. I was also really impressed that you created your own transition, the field guide. Wasn't there one that you called the
Yeah.
field guide?
Yeah, so different people have pointed out that Scott McCloud's transitions, there are others from the ones that he mentions.
Uh-huh.
And I was just trying to come up with a word for what I do, and he may even have one that I haven't come across, but what I do when I just sort of have like I have one comic that's showing different types of northern cardinal, the juvenile, the female, whatever, and then I show a bald cardinal, and that there's no time happening between the panels.
Yeah.
I'm just showing like here's a bunch of diagrams. It's sort of like field guide style, but I'm making fun of it. So that was kind of what I was thinking with that. That's
I
another
was
thing you.
just I was just trying to see if I have any comics in my most recent nature journal, but I'm having trouble like flipping through it and being attentive at the same time. Okay,
That's big too.
all right, let's talk about invertebrate butts.
You're gonna
Why, yeah, why is humor important?
Yeah, that's a good question, and people. I've sometimes come across people who think that we should not be humorous when we talk about the natural
Mm,
world, and especially when we're talking about issues in the natural world that are pretty serious. I think there are times when humor is inappropriate, but for the most part, so I use humor um, for a few reasons. One is if you add humor to something that's sort of stuffy that maybe not everybody would find interesting, you can expand its reach. So years ago, I did a comic about the difference between our ideas of what a bog is and what an actual bog is. And this sounds, I love bogs, but if you're not into bogs, so boring. You know, like I'm talking about like what it consists of and stuff. But I put some jokes in, and it spread all over the place, and it was so gratifying because people got excited about bogs. So adding a little bit of humor, can spread things to places where you wouldn't expect. But also, you can use humor to kind of like explore anything, whether it's something, you know, emotionally intense that you're going through. We all use humor to sort of get us through difficult things. So I feel like if I can't, you know, laugh or have fun when I'm working on really serious causes in a respectful way, then
hmm
I lose my motivation. So it can also help kind of keep us going during difficult times, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think on your website it says humor gives science wings. It helps facts travel to new places.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I was looking through your comics and there's one where the sort of it wasn't the end, it wasn't the punchline, but in there it had something that said parasitism is the highest form of flattery. And so where does humor come from? And I feel like some people might look at your comics and be like, wow, I am not funny like Rosemary. I wouldn't be able to come up with something, a line like that, you know? I mean, like I have in my mind, I guess you know, I could have come up with that, but I didn't. So like, where does it come from?
When you find out, call me and tell me, because I will make a lot more comics than I do. I don't know. It just hits you. That's by far the hardest part for me, is making jokes. And sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it doesn't. You can't really force it. The best thing I found is you just read a lot, get out a lot, try to relax, and ideas will just sort of happen. Or the whole trick of go into the shower, like have a shower, that I cannot tell you how many times that has saved my bacon, where I'm like, I have to come up with a comic. Oh my God. And then I'm in the shower and it happens. And there's something about the way it kind of stills your mind. But I haven't figured out a good way to reliably produce jokes. I'm working on a book right now that is all jokes. Like I've never done one before that is like almost entirely non-factual and just humor. And I just feel like the least funny person in the world after a day of writing. I'm just like, none of these are funny. What's wrong with me? So I don't know. I mean, I think you just go for it and have fun, and then either read what you wrote the next day or have maybe a friend read it to see if it's funny. But you
Uh-huh.
kind of just and take advantage of situations. So one of my most shared comics, I literally woke up in the middle of the night and wrote it down, and then I woke up the
Mhm.
next morning and looked at it and was like, "What did I write down?" And then I drew it, and I don't know. So I wish it was more reliable. I feel like you can work on getting better at drawing, a bird, but I struggle with getting funnier.
Is it the kind of thing where you have to prime the pump? Like you just start writing ones that aren't that funny, and then like, do you need to write unfunny ones to get to the funny ones, or can you just like wait for the really funny ones to come?
I feel like maybe real comedians can just write and write and write. I feel like
Hmm.
that works with writing exercises where when I need to write something, I'll just write and write. But with jokes, usually the
Mm.
first one's the funniest, and then I come up with 50 really bad ones.
Oh,
And then, yeah, it's just hard to,
interesting.
yeah, it's hard to, we all have moments, just like golden moments that are really funny in our lives. So just noticing those and capturing them, I think, is important.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a perfect segue to my last question about humor, which is how can people use humor in their nature journals? So I think you mentioned, a lot of people are serious in nature, and one thing I like to try to do is recognize when the things we do, sometimes we come up with stories about like, oh, this is my style or this is how I like to do it. But a lot of times it's just sort of something we've inherited, or it's like a default based on like what we've seen. And so I think a lot of people might not really include that much humor. There might be, watercolor this and like,
Mhm.
a couple birds here and notes and whatever. How do you think people could use more, even people who are like, they're just trying to like really observe nature or create cool nature journal pages? How are some ways people could try to use more humor?
Hmm. So I think incorporating comics is a really good way of doing it. I mean, you can do a study of, a plant, for example, and then if like a bee bumbles into it, you can draw a funny cartoon nearby showing that happening.
Hmm.
I think just being open to those absurd moments that you see in nature and then recording them. And you can use funny expressions. I know, Amy Tan has been doing that in her book, like, goofy bird expressions or just funny little side notes or
Hmm.
observations. I mean, it just comes down to your style or what you're interested in. But I think anywhere you want, you can incorporate humor into it too. And I would also, don't be afraid of humor. So, one stressful thing about using humor is sometimes people sort of worry they'll be taken less seriously. And I
Mm.
do think that can happen, if you're trying to be very scientific and serious, but also life is short. And I think we need to make those worlds a little bit sillier. So, I think just do your best and let loose and go for it. And then send me what you made, because everybody always sends me things that are funnier than I will ever do.
Cool. Okay, that now I have one more question about humor. Could you just talk about the invertebrate butts thing like a little bit? Because I was going to ask, is nature funny or is there humor in nature? And maybe this is a good example of how nature and humor kind of make sense together.
Yeah. So I don't know that nature is or isn't anything really.
Hmm.
I mean, what I'm really interested in is the ways that we put our own ideas and our own societal notions on top of nature. So, so I'm going to be talking about the house sparrow and the gull and pigeons, which are birds where we kind of use them as sort of scapegoats, and as what we like or dislike about nature changes, we sort of like or dislike these birds, and we'll put very human characteristics on them. We'll say they're greedy, or we'll say they're mean, or we'll say they're beautiful, or we'll say,
Hmm.
and so we have to be conscious, like, that we're putting things on top of nature. But I think, like, it's sort of a humbling experience, but things happen in nature that I, as a weird monkey, think are funny.
Hmm.
So that happens all the time. So, one time I saw a squirrel, and it was about to do like an elegant jump between two branches, and it did this like jump, and it just kind of missed, and it was totally fine. But like, when you see an animal fall, you're like, oh, it's not just me. Like, I'm not just ridiculous. Like, this animal did this thing. Sometimes, you see, I'm trying to think of other funny things that I've seen, like, when a bee is like sleeping in a flower and its butt is sticking out, like humans just think butts are funny for no clear
Yeah.
reason. So we're putting our own ideas on these animals, but I think that's totally okay so long as you're being respectful. And then once notice that stuff, it's everywhere. But I think everybody's had experiences in nature that are both dark or intense, but also ones where you're just laughing. I mean, I remember a few years ago I was watching a juvenile red-tailed hawk that had pulled, and I don't even know if it killed this pigeon, but it had a nice juicy pigeon, and it was eating this pigeon in a tree right outside my window. And I was just like, oh, this is so, I'm having this powerful nature experience. And then the hawk went to eat a chunk of bone that was too big, and it got stuck in its throat, and the hawk kind of like and like was, and then it like horked out this huge chunk of bone. And I just like I was like riveted, like what an incredible experience. And then I realized, what if someone was watching me eat?
Yeah.
I like got a nacho chip kind of like stuck in my mouth, like picking it out, and they're like, what an elegant animal. And I just like started laughing. So yeah, it
Nice.
happens all the time.
Nice. Okay, are you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right, can you make a lightning sound?
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't. I'm not good at that. There we go.
That was a good one. It worked.
The lightning.
Okay. All right, so the first ones are like short answer or yes or no, and then there's a couple longer ones at the end. All right, first one, is coffee an essential art supply?
No, because I'm a tea drinker.
Okay.
Yes,
Early bird or night owl?
night owl. That's when the moths come out too. So best time.
Fast or slow?
Slow.
Shorebirds or raptors?
Oh, shorebirds. But if a raptor shows up chasing them, I'm not sad.
Organized or messy?
You can't see my desk, so let's say organized. It's a lot, but let's go with it.
Does your family like birds?
Oh yeah. Yeah, 100%.
Snacks?
Yes.
Are you a perfectionist?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. If I was a perfectionist, I'd never get anything done.
Ink or graphite?
Ooh, ink. Cartoonist answer.
When it comes to art supplies, do you maximize or minimize?
Minimize, but that's because I mostly use Photoshop. And then when I'm out in the field, it's just it's like the same watercolor set. So yeah, minimize.
Experiment or refine?
Both. Is that allowed?
Yeah. Generalist or specialist?
Oh, generalist with many specialized rabbit holes.
Rule breaker or rule maker?
Breaker, I think.
Big picture or micro?
Think I'm pretty big picture. I wish I was less.
Jungle or desert?
Jungle.
And what face do you make when someone says they never read comics?
My internal face is, but I have a very nice, friendly, like, oh, well, let me share some comics with you.
I loved in one of your talks or classes you said, if anyone tells you they don't read comics, they're lying.
Yes, because so many of our instructions are in comic form, so they're everywhere.
Absolutely.
So everybody's reading them. Yeah.
Okay, if you could have an art superpower or a nature art superpower in nature, like a nature journaling superpower, what superpower would you want to have?
I think I would want to be able to match colors in watercolor immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you could go into a time machine anywhere in time to draw or nature journal, when would you want? It could be in the future, it could be in the past. When would you want to go and draw things?
I mean, I think I would have to go back to before some giant disaster and then write stop on a piece of paper. But ethics aside, I think I would want to Oh, I mean, it'd have to be something ancient. Like I'd be like underwater during the Ordovician and looking at trilobites and just have
Ooh, ooh.
in
Yeah, I
depth.
can't wait
Yeah.
to see your cartoons about that. I'm a big Ray Troll fan. Are you familiar with the
Yeah.
illustrator Ray Troll?
Does he do the hyper realistic ocean stuff that's like really brightly
It's not hyper realistic. It's
or
like
hyper detailed, I
pastels
guess?
on black paper, and he does do ocean, very crowded ocean scenes, and he has a whole book about fossils, and he incorporates a lot of humor into his stuff. A lot of
Yeah.
fish, salmon, um, very cool stuff. Okay, so and if you could, in the time machine, you can only bring 5 art supplies with you and 1 snack. What 5 art supplies and what snack would you take?
Oh, I mean, I would bring like my computer and my tablet and my, all that stuff. But if it has to be
Okay.
something, more
No,
physical, I would.
that's you
Oh,
could do
that's good.
that.
Okay, yeah. Computer, tablet, and stylus.
Okay.
And I would need scrap paper or a journal, and that's 4. Is that 4 art supplies or
That's
5?
4. You're up,
Okay.
you're 4, so you got one more.
Then Stedler pen, probably.
Okay.
One of the black ones. And then my snack would be, can a human live on Reese's cups? I don't think so, but
You
that's what
don't
I would
have to worry about the survival part is not okay. Reese's peanut butter cups. Good choice.
like.
Okay, and then all right, there's 2 more lightning round questions. If there was a nature journaling Olympics, which event would you be in?
Oh no. I don't know. Can I just be in the stands? I don't,
Sure,
yeah, I don't feel like I have like if there's like a humor section, put me in there. I can
sure.
make that.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Funniest nature journal page. That would be great. Okay, and then the last one. Which animal species would be best at nature journaling?
Oh. Um, Gosh, that's a good question. Uh, I feel like, do you ever see pikas or pikas? I don't know how you say them,
Hmm.
but they're the little rodent guys. I think they're related to rabbits, and they gather a bunch of little flowers and they take them into their nest. I feel like they could like pick a bunch of little pretty things to draw and then bring them back in, and then they could draw all of the little flowers and leaves and stuff that they
So that's
gathered.
what they're doing all winter. Is all winter long they're nature journaling in their
Mhm.
little tunnels.
Dried
Awesome!
red flowers.
Yay!
Yeah, yeah.
All right, good job in the lightning round. Okay, so just a few closing questions here. Um, the this conference, the Wild Wonder Conference this year, and a lot of years, there's a theme of sort of conservation and art and how those two are related. Like a couple of the other keynote speakers aren't artists, but as far as
Mm,
I can tell, they're just like biologists and conservationists working with puffins. Um, so
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and I think for us on the inside, sometimes we the connection between art and conservation makes sense. But what do you think about the connection between the two? And is it obvious to people from the outside who haven't already drunk the Kool-Aid?
Well, if you're talking about now, is Derek Jackson? He's speaking, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because he's also a photographer, so like there's a lot
Okay.
of art. Yeah, he's incredible. I've done some events that he's been at, and he's amazing. But yeah, hmm, I feel like there are some pretty clear connections that you can make. So an example that I think about a lot that kind of kickstarted me into doing this a lot more was years and years and years ago. I worked in bird rehabilitation, or I volunteered really, working with little baby birds that had been what we called kidnapped. So people will see baby birds that have left the nest but are still being cared for by their parents, but they look quite helpless, and
Hmm.
they're in a stage called fledgling. So they have like really short tails, stubby wings. Um, they totally do look like they're in trouble. But this is an essential learning period, and they need to be out with their parents. And people will rescue them all the time and take them to wildlife rehabilitators who, are not as good substitute parents, no matter how hard they try. So we were inundated by these fledglings. So I made a comic drawing. There was a chart that was like what to do if you find a baby bird, and I put a really silly like Jurassic Park joke in there too, just to add some humor. And it spread all over the place. And a bunch of people wrote to me and said, I wound up helping baby birds because of your chart. And to me, that felt like a thing that we can all do to share important information, and a powerful testament to the importance of art and humor in spreading information. So I don't think it's the only tool at all, but I think it's one tool in this giant toolbox that we have to make that will help us conserve things.
Great. Let's put. I'm gonna show a slide here. Let's see what this shrinks. Our heads are gonna get shrunk. But this is your ocean acidification comic. I couldn't fit the title here. Hopefully, people who are watching this can get an idea. At least the alien joke. Speaking of movie jokes, there's one right there at the top.
Oh, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about this comic and how you? Because I think this topic of climate change, ocean acidification, this can be one of those things that I don't see come up very much in the nature journaling community. I'm very I think nature journaling has huge amount of potential for addressing some of these really scary problems, and I do think there's a level of responsibility we have, and these tough topics. So it's like I don't think that many people want to like nature journal the extinction of an animal, or if there's like a big algal die off in the San Francisco Bay Area and there's like all these dead animals washing up. It seems like a little bit of a hard sell to get people to nature journal these topics. So could you talk a little bit about this comic and maybe how you think about addressing these really scary topics?
Yeah, so I make a lot of comics about climate change, and a lot of them are about things that I'm directly seeing. Some of them aren't. This is about something that I wasn't directly seeing, and this one's pretty old. So I feel like this one might be maybe 15 years old or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, I can tell because I switched to using a font that a friend made of my
Mm,
handwriting, because at one point I had some repetitive strain from writing too much, and so that was helping a lot. And I'm not using the font here, so it's harder to read. But yeah, I just started tackling issues and just seeing if I could explain them in a short amount of time. There's some unscientific stuff here, so it's not like a green searing acid. The aliens
mm-hmm,
joke is a little dated, although I think there's a new aliens movie out now, so maybe not.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, so this was just one where I was trying to talk about this thing, and then follow some of what I've been told is important for science communication. So clearly explaining things, and then immediately cutting at the end to what are some things that you can do.
Yeah.
And then I did one a couple years ago that was longer, that was about the loss of ice and ice skating in my hometown in Ottawa,
Mm.
Canada, where I grew up, and about how I had seen in my lifetime. We have what the Guinness Book of World Records says is the world's longest skating rink.
Whoa.
So we have this giant, I think maybe man-made skating rink, but we have this giant canal system that freezes over, and it's polished, and then people come to Ottawa, Canada, from all around to skate on this canal, and they drop these
Whoa.
little huts for changing, and they drop there's like a pastry place and a hot chocolate place, and it's all amazing. And I lived right on this canal system when I was a kid, so everybody I knew skated. We skated to and from school. It was
Oh my
incredible.
God.
And the last 2 years, so 2 years ago, we had no ice. No skating days. So there was ice, but it was too thin. When I was a kid, the skating season could last from December through part of March. We had 0 days last year, 2 years ago. And then last year, I think we had about a week, which is just shocking. So in my lifetime, I've seen this thing go. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was talking about it, I was talking about the emotional impact, and then also how it's not the most important impact of climate change. But these little kind of cultural shifts can really, impact. And I feel like, so climate scientists tell us that one of the most important things we can do about climate change is talk about it. And I think we're all very afraid of talking about it because it's a bummer, and because it's we worry people won't want to listen to us if we talk about it, and it's depressing. But we need to talk about it. We need to be talking about this thing that we're all seeing, especially as nature journalists, because we're all seeing it happen. And then when we talk about it, we make other people feel less alone, and then solutions occur. So I think it's really important to talk about these things for sure. And I agree with you.
So what is it? What is like little kind of? I love the way you have the actionable things at the end of the comic. So like if you were to do that right now in this conversation, like what is one of the like green check marks that someone could try? Not any of the. We don't need to talk about the red check. Maybe the red check mark
Yeah.
would be not doing anything or pretend, just focusing on looking the other way. Another red check mark maybe would be like just going so into it that you get like depressed or whatever and just like burn out or don't take care of yourself emotionally. But what would a green check mark be for someone who's like nature journaling and wants to maybe address some of these topics or potentially sad things that they're seeing in the environment around them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would start off by saying take care of your mental health. So I, for a while, saw a climate aware therapist, which I know is like a bizarre sounding thing, but years ago, I mean, I was, this is happening to a lot of kids these days, but I was really sad about climate change like 20 years ago or something like that. And I saw a therapist and they were like, this is a real problem. I can't help you. But there's a lot that someone can do to help you contextualize things and get perspective. And I learned things like when you're out in the woods and it's not the way it was when in the past, and you're seeing, invasive species, or you're seeing it's too warm, or you're seeing things that you don't feel comfortable seeing, but you're also seeing beautiful stuff. You have to hold both of those things at the same time, and you can do that, and it's okay. You can't let one thing ruin the other thing. Like, experience it fully. And then I would say talk about it is the number one thing. Just talk about it. Wow, it's hot, climate change sucks. Like, people, the number of people I see who say things like, why is it so hot? And as a climate activist, I'm always like, like, I know weather isn't climate, but like, wow, there's a lot of wildfires this year. Weird. Like, that always like, talk about it. And then I would just say, like, not to get political, but like, I've just written to my reps and said, hey, this is important to me and I'm upset. And I have gotten involved with local climate groups, and they can give you guidance on what to do. So I volunteer for a local climate group. So there's a lot of stuff that's out there that will at least make you feel, some empowerment. And then I do with them because I have a niece, and I want to be able to look her in the eye and say, hey, I'm working to try to help your future. And I think that's important.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Okay, cool. Well, for folks who haven't checked it out, definitely check out Rosemary's website here. And thank you so much for making the time to be on the show and cover these topics from funny to very serious and everywhere in between, from invertebrate butts to disappearing ice. Thank you so much, Rosemary. And thanks to everybody who watched the show live and for people who watched the recorded version. All right, I'll see you at the conference.
Yeah, I'll see you, and it'll be fun and lots of hilarious pigeon facts. So I think people will get it.
Yay.
I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody. And bye, pigeon that's watching.
Bye, everyone.